I have a variety of projects underway. That is to say, they are in the planning stage and gathering materials, and I will be putting them together fairly soon. As promised, here's a quick look at some of the plans. All right, first of all, smallest project of all, sort of a warm-up here. Just a trebuchet. If you're not familiar with it, a trebuchet is essentially the sling form of a catapult. It works by weight, traditionally anyway. You can see examples of them at an absurdly large scale in the third Lord of the Rings movie, flinging parts of buildings and such like. In this particular case, the plan is to actually have one that fits on a tabletop. As you see here, the sides are held up by angles, by angle braces of wood. And I had a look at that and realized that at this scale, that's probably more trouble than it's worth. So I revamped it and did this instead. The braces, which had to be cut at 45-degree angles and then screwed in at odd angles, they've been replaced by a triangle of plywood, which I realized would hold at least as well and be much easier to deal with. So I'm going to be putting this together, and then I'm going to experiment with a couple of things regarding its efficiency that I've heard. This whole thing is not just a matter of making fun things, although that is the idea, but also to be able to experiment with them and see if I can make them better than I've seen before, because I'm always full of ideas. Next is a table. This table is something I plan to bring to piratey events, specifically the group of buccaneers that I go and play with several times a year, and we need a great table. A great table is where everybody gathers for dinner and so forth. Great meaning large, not spectacular. This table won't be spectacular. It will be about 3.5 feet across by 8 feet long and will collapse. And it needs to look probable for the period. Now, it's going to be covered probably with a tablecloth to make life easier and to keep it nicer looking. But it does need to avoid excessive modern-looking metalwork and also no plastic. So I've found a design that someone did. I still can't figure out exactly who, but I then adapted it significantly to be this, and hopefully I'll be able to bring that to the events. Also for these events, I have been using a pair of tarps and a pole, actually a 2x2, that has a couple of screws attached to it, and making a tent out of that. The canvas drop cloths, actually not so much tarps, but canvas drop cloths, you can make it out of tarps. They serve to make a long, low tent, which works and is plausible for any number of centuries, actually. However, I'm not a short person, and getting dressed in, especially into costume in there, is a close sort of thing. So I will be not only demonstrating to you how to build that tent, but also the way in which I'm going to make a much, much larger tent by expanding from 2 drop cloths to 4 and giving it some support and making something which is still perfectly period, in fact, demonstrably more so, but also with a vast amount more space. Lastly, here we have a plan for a foundry. This foundry is very similar to one you may recognize, having been done by Grant Thompson, the King of Random, and a lot of people have done something similar since then, including a friend of mine, who I've discussed the pros and cons with the various designs. I've seen people do a variety of things with it, and I've seen some mistakes made. What I'd like to do is take all of these things together and call out the mistakes and include the improvements and see about making something that's much easier to make and easier to work with and probably more reliably comes out well. That way you can make it too. And then, of course, we'll have a lot of fun with it. Now, that's not all the projects I have in mind, but it's a good start.